You are listening to Compound Money Quietly, the CMQ Investing podcast. My name is Chris Franco, and I have a question here from a fellow CMQ investor who goes by the name of Nick. We are on Instagram Live right now, and Nick asks, how do you convince yourself to invest if you feel the whole stock market is overvalued? Okay, so obviously we have to start off with a few different things here. Is the whole stock market overvalued? Well, it doesn't matter what I think or what you think. It's how Nick feels. So we have to operate based on, what I think a lot of people are dealing with right now, which is some heightened anxiety with the market. Stocks aren't only going up anymore. So it seems. Now, if you've been listening to the podcast, and I have to say this because it's top of my mind, we've definitely been trying to collectively get prepared for these times. If you have not yet followed the podcast on Apple Podcast or Spotify, please take a quick second and do that. That way you'll be first to receive updates about these new episodes, and you'll also be among the first who are able to not just have the information, but use the information. But I do have an answer here that I think will be useful, hopefully to Nick and to the rest of you. When I think back to Charlie Munger and how Charlie Munger invests, or how, some of the, call it like a Phil Fisher. I was reading about Lou Simpson recently. What they have in common, and kind of what the enduring lesson is it's all about your time horizon. If you have a long time horizon, then those concerns, while still good to be thinking about, they're not as pressing. When you look at the price, your entry price of something, you want to get the price right. You want to have a margin of safety. But with enough time, it creates a margin of safety of its own. It doesn't mean it makes up for you overpaying. But I think that's something where for a lot of us, and, I've said before, I'm 34, and, I've been figuring this stuff out myself the hard way. And I try to share, things that I'm still coming across and learning, but also, sharing things where I've made mistakes in the past. And I think an example of this would be, being a little bit younger and feeling like, yeah, I'm ready to, load up. But then when I put that money in and the market's not just going up, I underestimated the psychology. So I think another reason you don't hear this as often, why do, promote something, and I say promote, not actively promote it, but just talk about something like the VU, or just any sort of low cost index that covers, a large, let's say a broad section of the market, the S&P 500, or just, the total stock market. Those are, I also think they're like psychological cushions as well. When I've had volatility in the market, like serious volatility, I remember when I first started, moving more and more money to things like in Vanguard, I never had that urge to panic sell. It just never happened because I understood what I was in, and I knew it was for a long time period. There was something about the money, and still to this day, there's something about the money that I put into a low-cost index fund ETF where I don't have any expectation of talking to that money again for like at least 10 years. And I say that because I was thinking of something last night. You guys tell me if you think this is weird. I think it's brilliant. Brilliant, buddy. It's Connor, the overconfident investor. So if you thought of the money that you put in the market, no matter how much it is, how much or how little at a time, if every time you put a chunk of change into something, you give it a name, you give it a persona, you humanize it. And instead of thinking it like it's your money, you think of it like it's your child. And, you've got 18 years till you no longer have that responsibility. And I say that like what a parent, right? Like, well, I'm done. But if you think about that, right? If you thought of your money that you're investing, one chunk at a time as an actual living human being, you give it a name, it's your baby. And, there's going to be some bumps along the way. I'm making things up right now. I'm not a parent, so I don't know why I'm using a child analogy, but I think this is the best analogy probably that I can come up with right now. If I want to say, hey, we caught Billy smoking cigarettes, you're not just going to kick Billy out forever. Get out of here, Bill. You're done. We're done with you, Bill. That's not going to be the case, right? You're going to have patience, and you're going to trust that what you've put in, in terms of what your intents, everything else, that's going to work out. And you understand that this is just part of growing up. I'm really going with this metaphor, by the way. You would think about it differently. And I think sometimes when we put money in, whether to especially individual stocks, even when you feel like you have your psychology, where you need it to be, there's just something about seeing that number go down. And I don't think the availability of the brokerage accounts, whether it's on your phone or your computer, I don't think that helps either, because you're constantly reminded that you're down. You see all the red. It's anxiety inducing, and deliberately. When that's going on, it's very difficult to, you go from being in where we're trying to be as a system 2 thinker, and you go right back to being a system 1 thinker. And so I wonder with this little experiment or this little trick, if you start thinking about, when you're putting a chunk of change in the market, think of it like, give it a name, pretend like, draw a little picture, and when it's, and have birthdays for it, right? Like when it turns 10, and you haven't touched it, you do something nice for yourself. Like, we should be trying to figure out little mind hacks like that, because that's something that I think no one's talking about. No one has any incentive to talk about that. And I think there's room for novel solutions. So I know that's a long-winded way to kind of, tackle this question, but just to recap here, if you're just joining, Nick asked, how do you convince yourself to invest if you feel the whole market is overvalued? And the short answer here is, if you have a long time horizon and you know what you're buying and you're not, overpaying for it, then you want to keep investing. You want to do what Jack Bogle says, keep doing it and stay the course. Don't get deterred by, these moments of time, because that's what they are. We gotta, I think I'll keep saying it, but collectively, keep that long time horizon in mind. With all that said, I want to thank you again for listening. Make sure, as I said before, you follow the podcast on Apple Podcasts or Spotify so you'll never miss an episode. And if you enjoy the content, please take a second to rate us 5 stars. And if you're on Apple Podcasts, it would mean a lot if you could take a few minutes to write a written review. Those go a long way in helping more people discover this content. Last but not least, if you are a new listener, there are 60, actually more than 60 additional episodes for you to listen to and enjoy. They're all meant to be short, full of wisdom, useful, honest, transparent, every good adjective you can imagine. So on that note, this has been Compound Money Quietly, the CMQ Investing Podcast. My name is Chris Franco. Thank you for listening. We'll talk soon.